Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the third installment of my prep and road to 2024 USPA Nationals. Today, I am back at the Coliseum Barbell Club for a solid back day. With deadlift being a huge point of improvement for me heading into my next meet, it's definitely a day that I'm always going to be looking to maximize. I came into this workout with some decent recovery and I had a decent warm-up prior to warming up with the bar, so without wasting any time, I got right into it. Now, for whatever random reason, I was kind of reminded of what it was like when I first started training. I'll sometimes randomly and for absolutely no reason at all just reminisce about the beginning of my fitness journey. Because it gets so easy to get caught up in the numbers that you're chasing, you forget how far you've come along in the process. Like, I'm currently at a point now where I don't acknowledge myself as being strong in the conventional sense of the term. Like, I completely understand that strength is relative. You know, what's strong to me may not be strong to you and vice versa. But I guess in the general sense, when people talk about strength, they're always measuring themselves to whoever they consider to be strong. Take the weight that I just had on the bar, for example. That's about 154 pounds. When I first started training, I couldn't conceive moving that kind of weight. 154 pounds seemed insane to me the first day I was ever in the gym. But then by month 2.5, where I'm deadlifting that for reps and I'm moving on to 225, all of a sudden doesn't seem that heavy. I say that to say that the average person would look at me and say, okay, he's strong. Sure, it's a valid opinion, but for me, I'm measuring myself to who are the strongest people in my bracket, right? Because the average American doesn't lift 6 times a week, 5 times a week, even 4 times a week, right? It's just the fact that most people are not getting a consistent amount of exercise. So it's absolutely not fair to measure yourself strength-wise to the average person, right? So let's look at the average person who goes to the gym. The average person who goes to the gym that's achieved maintenance, right, is not powerlifting or bodybuilding. That's just a fact, right? People who choose to go the competitive route are on a different tier that I call competitive maintenance. Those people can't even measure themselves to the average lifter because the average lifter isn't pursuing those same goals. And to those competitors that choose to measure themselves to the average person, I would argue are not actual competitors. So in the grand scheme of where I'm trying to be, I'm measuring myself to who are the best in my weight class in this particular competitive avenue that I've chosen to pursue. And those competitors are way stronger than me. That's just a fact. So that just means I've got to work significantly hard so I can get myself to a point where I can be among those best competitors. Which is why I'm currently hitting this back day with a very positive attitude. I'm back at the Coliseum, ready to get into some slow-eccentric conventional deadlifts. At this point in the workout, I'm kind of going through my typical process of kind of feeling out what else I need to get warm. I'm incrementally going up, getting my body warm, getting my nervous system ready for the deadlifts, and just assessing how the weight is feeling as I'm slowly going up. Obviously, we do not want the weight to feel heavier or uncomfortable at a lighter weight, and if that's the case, then that's a problem. But in a couple seconds here, you're going to notice me get into some external hip rotations because at this point, I'm kind of feeling like my hips can use a little bit of some loosening. So I get into those rotations before I get into this next set. External and internal hip rotations are actually a warm-up I do every single workout. So low effort of a warm-up. It's very easy to do, very simple. And there's no reason to not want to open up your hips. Hip mobility is actually really essential to more movements than people would think across multiple different muscle groups. If I told you that proper hip mobility could actually help you maximize your bench press, would you believe me? Think about it. To set yourself up well for a bench, you want a good arch. To get a good arch, you want your legs as close to your midline as possible. This means being able to bring your feet back far enough that they're just about, if not almost parallel to your hip flexors. This becomes significantly harder to achieve with bad hip mobility. But enough about the bench, it's actually back day. So let's get back into some deadlift talk. Right now I'm loading the bar with 265, I believe. I'm still getting used to these kilo conversions, but I believe that's 265. And in 1 second, you're going to see me whip out the Mark Bell Slingshot briefs. So I initially got these as a tool to help me maximize my squat during training, but I thought, why not try them out for deadlifts? I knew going in that they probably weren't going to give me that big rebound that they would for squats, but I thought, even in a hinge movement like the deadlifts, if I can get even a little bit of a deadlift rebound with these, they might be worth also incorporating. Now you see me doing these 7-second eccentric holds. I'm trying to hold it for as long as possible. These are actually a lot harder than I thought they would be initially, but at this point in prep, I've gotten used to them. And the slingshot briefs, surprisingly, are actually helping more than I thought they would. They're definitely not as effective as a squat, but I do feel some really good compression in the lower body for starters, and definitely a little bit of a rebound. But at this point, I'm not really deadlifting anything that I would consider to be heavy, so I'm more intrigued to see how I'm going to start to feel as the weight goes up, especially with a 7-second eccentric. Now, one thing that you are going to notice is when you look at the back of those briefs, they're definitely sagging a little bit. I definitely got some diaper action going on back there. That's why I'm pulling them up. In hindsight, I probably should have just worn these as they were intended to be worn and not wore my shorts under these. I probably wouldn't have had to deal with pulling them up the entire workout, but just some food for thought for later. You probably also saw me bust out my Theragun and kind of hit my back with it a little bit just because it was feeling a tad bit tight, and I try to get ahead of that kind of tightness as I start to go up before it kind of ruins my top sets. But you see me add 10 kilos on each side there, which comes out to 308.6 pounds, weight that shouldn't necessarily give me an issue, but again, these are 7-second eccentrics, so I've noticed that those first few reps feel great when I do have that burst of energy, and then as the last few reps come, I'm basically fighting for my life. Now, one thing that these sets do allow me to do is really focus on form and mechanics. That is one thing that I do love about these slow eccentrics. It's just a different way of just not just shocking your nervous system, but shocking your body and your mind as well. Forcing yourself to have to slow down also forces you to do the movement correctly because these become significantly harder when the movement is off, when the mechanics are off. So I did notice that as I was going up in weight, my form was actually getting a lot better, significantly better than it was last week on conventional. But going back to what deadlifts were like for me when I first started, it was definitely more of a mental thing than a physical thing. There's just something about picking up a ton of weight off the ground that can absolutely be a mindfuck. You know, physically you have the strength to do it, but if your mindset isn't in that place of, hey, this weight is going to come up, you might not be able to get it. And for that reason, I feel like, especially based on personal experience, deadlift is such a mental movement as well. Like the mental energy you put into being able to complete it, it's immense. And I feel like being able to kind of channel that could be the difference in a really good deadlift session versus the contrary. Now you're seeing me continuing to pull these up as the diaper butt is in full effect. Again, my fault for not utilizing these shorts correctly. But so far this session has not been bad at all. I actually switched to the side angle just because that side view gives you such a better perspective of what your form actually looks like, at least from a mechanics perspective. And I'm noticing it's not as bad as it was the week prior where I was way more hunched over, but as I continue to go through those reps, similar to my squat, the form actually gets better. Again, the momentum is actually helping me, but one thing that I do need to work on is making that first rep look like all the other ones. Now at this point, I load 352.7 on the bar, and so far deadlifts have been moving very well. Other than the last few reps getting a lot more difficult, the sets have been flowing very nicely. I'm finding a really nice balance between moving up in the right amount of increments to make sure that the weight isn't too light, but it's also not too heavy that I can't complete the set. I'm usually hitting an RP 9-10 at those last couple reps. Now at this point, you see me get into my little routine. I have this whole little mental routine. I put my belt on. I don't go to deadlift right away. I got to check my phone, get the music right, go get some chalk, play with the buckle a little bit, then come back and then kind of set up for my deadlift. And at this point, you see me start pulling the slack out of the bar, which is a huge aspect of deadlifting that I never understood when I first started training. A big part of that was because the first gym I trained at was in LA Fitness. Anybody that goes to LA Fitness knows that they use those slick ass hammer strength bars. Now I say slick because those bars have no gnarling, they have no grip, and you need some kind of strap to be able to get in an effective workout. That's not to say that it's impossible to be able to do a deadlift without a strap on those bars, but it's a lot more difficult due to the lack of grip. I've almost actually been decapitated a couple times on the bench press when those bars almost slipped out of my palms. It was a terrifying experience. And I also don't mean to come off like a massive gym snob, like, oh, I'm better than people who deadlift on hammer strength bars. But as I've gotten used to proper bars that are specifically designed for these types of movements, it kind of reminds me that I was kind of at a disadvantage when I first started deadlifting on that type of equipment. And I kind of wonder what my progress would have been had I started powerlifting a little sooner. But at the same time, I'm actually kind of grateful that training was a little bit harder in the beginning because it just made transitioning over to proper equipment significantly easier, thus increasing my progress exponentially in a short period of time. But on this next set, I have 375 on the bar for a slow eccentric, which is 10 pounds heavier than I went last week. So it was definitely interesting to see how this set would move. Now, once again, near the end of that set, that 7 seconds turned more into like 5 seconds. And at that point, I was just doing kind of like an eccentric to failure. But it was definitely a solid last set, all things considering. And at this point, it was time to take those slingshot briefs off, get the TYR barefoot lifters back on, and get ready for my next set, which were Romanian deadlifts. Now, this is a movement that I'm extremely familiar with. The Romanian deadlift has always been a movement that I've associated with really good hamstring development. It is like the best heavy compound movement to target your hamstrings and your lower back as well. I remember in my early training days, this would be a movement that I would do right after back squats. And I'd go up progressively every single week in my RDLs, and I noticed over time that when I incorporated these in my training program, my squats would actually go up. Similar to most people, I've always been quad dominant, which in the beginning affected my squats in a big way because I wasn't able to really get my hips all the way back and sink into that movement. I would have a really good squat session and feel most of that in my quads. And it wasn't until I got a better understanding of exercise science that I realized I shouldn't be feeling all of this in my quads. There should probably be some soreness in my hamstrings and my glutes as well. So doing RDLs more consistently actually helped me get better mobility in my hamstrings, strengthen my hamstrings, and I was actually in turn able to squat a lot deeper and squat more weight over time. Now, you see me put the belt on just to give me some compression in the trunk because I just did some heavy deadlifts. Back is already going to be a little bit sore. So if I ditch my belt and raw dog this set, it's definitely going to hurt my ability to actually go up in weight because now I'm trying to focus on bracing a lot more and having my core do a little more than it needs to in this movement. So just to avoid all that, I just bust the belt out, put it on, give me some more compression so I can focus on the essential of movement, which is being able to get down nice and low, as good of as an eccentric as I can get, and being able to keep those legs slightly bent so I can really get the full effect of the movement. Now, I got to give some appreciation to the calves, man. The calves have definitely come a significantly long way. You know, they're not big, but it's okay. They're definitely there. You know what I mean? Like they're there, you see them, they make an appearance, but they're not like massive. So I will take it given my genetic. I also busted out the Versa grips just to maximize my grip so I can actually maximize the movement overall. Raw dogging these with no grip is fine at a lighter weight, but as you get heavier, I don't necessarily see a detriment to throwing some straps on. At the end of the day, I don't want to pre-exhaust my grip because I'm going to have to deadlift again this week. So I'd rather make sure my grip is as fresh as possible for my next deadlift session. Otherwise, if I was deadlifting once a week, I'd probably use these as a means to strengthen my grip as well. But again, I'm trying to train smarter. Now, you're seeing me pour some stuff into my water bottle, and that's actually BCAAs, also known as branched chain amino acids, which I've used on and off throughout my fitness journey, but never consistently. Because in the past, when I would take BCAAs, at least intra-workout, I would feel like puking, like projectile vomiting, especially when I'm doing a movement where I have my belt on. So deadlifts out of the question, squats out of the question, maybe bench. I was okay with bench just based on the nature of the movement, but anything else that was a compound movement, I would feel very uncomfortable taking BCAAs. But a huge part of that is I'm not somebody that trains well on a full stomach anyways. The less stuff I have in my stomach, the better I'll be able to optimize my training. So in the past, I would take BCAAs in the off season because I'd be training hypertrophy. My workout sessions would be really long and I would need something to kind of help give me energy and extend how much longer I can really have that burst for during my workouts. But it was counterproductive because throughout the entire workout, all it did was add more stuff to my stomach and make me more full. But now that I'm on a caloric deficit, I have less in my stomach anyways. So BCAAs are actually relatively harmless, especially when I take moderate sips throughout the workout. That's kind of the key. I would kind of take bigger sips before, but I've kind of learned to pace myself a little more. So combination of the smaller sips with my stomach being a lot lighter now has made BCAAs a lot more effective. Now on this fourth and final set, I'm hitting about 295. Could definitely be getting a little bit deeper. Ideally, you want to not only be going below the knee, but almost close to the ankle. And I'm not really doing a good job of that here on this set. Not going to make any excuses at all. Definitely got to get deeper. And now moving on to my second to last movement, lying hamstring curls. It's a classic hamstring isolation workout, and because it's my second to last movement, I'm trying to blast through these as fast as possible, not necessarily to kind of rush the rest of the workout, but because I'm trying to get in a little bit of that hypertrophy style cardio. And what I mean by hypertrophy style cardio is kind of getting my conditioning up in general. Cardio isn't something that I've been doing consistently. I'm just now getting back into it, but I try to incorporate as much intro workout cardio as possible. So it's not something I can do with my heavy compound movements, but anywhere I can kind of start to train like a bodybuilder, I'm going to do that with my accessories. It's kind of giving me the best of both worlds. With squat, bench, and deadlift, I want to train to prepare myself for a competition day. So that means taking adequate amount of rest in between sets. This is something that I've been working very hard to get adjusted to because I come from a training background where we're taking minimal rest in between sets. It's very hypertrophy focused, very bodybuilder-esque workouts. And I don't necessarily see a purpose in completely abandoning that training ideology just because I'm powerlifting now. Like, I'm not doing hamstring curls at a competition. I'm not doing back extensions at a competition. So there's no reason why I can't kind of train these movements how I want to train them. Like, let's be real, the implications of me taking minimal rest in between accessory movements isn't really that significant in my opinion. And lately, in my accessory movements, I've kind of been reminded of my poor conditioning. I try to blast through a set of 10, and by rep 8 and 9, I'm getting gassed, and that's something that I'm not used to. So kind of trying to find a balance between being able to stay conditioned while also training like a powerlifter for those heavy compounds has definitely been something that I'm working on. Now, back extensions have always been one of those cornerstone movements. I remember when I first started training, my uncle would really emphasize the importance of these because this movement is very similar to the RDL. I actually consider it the cousin of the RDL because in a similar way, you're also not just training your lower back, but your hamstrings as well. It's like an invert RDL, where the RDL primarily targets the hamstrings as a primary muscle and the lower back as a secondary muscle. Back extensions target the lower back as a primary muscle with the hamstrings as a secondary muscle. And this is one of those movements I'm 100% guilty of having neglected in the past. And neglecting the movement in the past has led to my deadlift progression slowing down. So you tell me what you think the correlation is. So suffice to say, I will not be skipping these again. But that's all I have for today's video. If you watched till the end, thank you so much for not just watching the video, but following my journey. That's all I have for today's workout. I'm Koffi. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.